So I had the opportunity to talk to a Dr. Irving Finkel, who is the assistant curator of ancient Mesopotamian script at the British Museum. And we talked about a lot of things, but mostly the oldest known rulebook in ancient history. This tablet dates back 4 millennia to the city of Ur and describes the oldest board game in the world. So check it out. I certainly was excited to hear what he had to say. Dr. Finkel, obviously we're having a glorious chat today. One, because ever since I started having a chance to read about what you do and who you are and the amazing things that you've accomplished up to this point, I can't help but be in awe of just one, that your job title alone is something that is magnificent. And if you don't mind me saying, and please correct me if I got this wrong, you're the assistant keeper of the Department of Western Asiatic Antiquities.
Yes, an assistant keeper is an interesting term
Yes.
because most people think it refers to the zoo. And in fact, if you have experience of working in the zoo, it comes in very handy if you work in a museum. It's the same kind of environment.
Instead of living animals, you have cuneiform tablets.
You have cuneiform tablets, which are very troublesome sometimes, and of course members of the public even, who behave rather like they do in the zoo and eat things and put them on the floor and all that. So it's rather a useful kind of background. It is a very marvellous place to work, this museum, because it has unbelievable treasures from all over the world since the beginning of time. So it is a great privilege to work here.
And actually, it's the largest collection right now of cuneiform tablets. You were saying it's 130,000 at this point?
Please, I mean, it's true, but I don't want people who work in other collections to feel humiliated, but this is in fact the truth of it.
It's amazing.
We're much bigger, much more important than any other collection. I mean, that just happens to be the truth of it.
Most important, just a small thing. Tell me a little bit about this magnificent discovery that I'm most interested in hearing about, which is, unless I'm mistaken, the earliest recorded rule book in all of board game history.
Yeah, actually, that is a pretty miraculous thing, because we really do have about 130,000 clay tablets. And most of them are about the size of a mobile telephone, something like that. Sometimes they're a bit bigger, sometimes smaller. And they cover 3,000 years of time and all aspects of daily life. And among all those tablets, which you can hardly envisage in your mind, there is one which has rules on for a board game. And it is remarkable. Firstly, it was written in the 2nd century BC, in the year 177 BC. And this was when the Romans were alive, people like that. It was near the end of the ancient world where they used cuneiform writing. And what happened was that in Babylon in this year, a very famous astronomer who spent his life observing things in the heavens and tracking the movements of the planets and so forth, decided to write a kind of analysis of the board game that everybody around him played.
Okay.
And he had an interesting reason for doing it, because this game of Ur, the one we're talking about, when this took place, there were 12 squares up the middle of the board. And because he was an astronomer, it struck him that these 12 squares could correspond to the signs of the zodiac. And therefore, when you threw the dice and moved the pieces and they moved along this channel, it was like the planets moving through the ecliptic. And so he had a kind of cosmic interpretation of what was really a street game that people played outdoors.
So the only reason we have rules for this game now in the era that we're in is because an astronomer took the time to observe, based on his curiosities, this street game that he then applied to his knowledge of astrology.
And what he did is he knew that taxi drivers and people in the street played a very simple version, and there was a complex version. And one of the things about it, which is astonishing for board game history, is that when he wrote that tablet, the 5 pieces which each player had were all different one from the other. So with all race games in the world, Parcheesi, Ludo, all these things, pieces are like pawns, they are inert. But when this astronomer described the game, the 5 pieces had their own values. You had to get a special throw to get each one on. It had a special starting throw, and there were bets. So there was a whole load of stuff on top of it. So we have this really complicated thing, looks like a piece of breakfast cereal. You'd never believe it was writing, and you have to chisel it open and unpack all the different ideas, but it adds up to this. The most important thing is that from it, we can tell how they really played this game. And that is miraculous.
That's
It's,
amazing.
yeah.
Oh
Mm.
my gosh. Well, you brought up an interesting thing because you were talking about other racing games, and it sounds like that this is a racing game, the Royal Game of
It's
Ur.
absolutely a race game, yes.
That's beautiful.
So you have two equal sides.
Okay.
You have special dice, and you manipulate the pieces around the board. And of course, sometimes there are pitfalls, and sometimes lucky squares. The actual material structure of the game is something which should be completely familiar to any modern board game player in the world. So, for example, if you got into a time machine and you went back to Babylon, in this big urban city with all these people and all the traffic and all the noise and everything, you went into a cafe and two Babylonians were playing this board game, you would immediately understand the whole thing, because the actual structure of the game is exactly what we cherish in a board game today. So I'll tell you, for example, if you analyze this game, there are some properties which are very familiar to modern board game designers. So, for example, the game is perfectly fair. Okay, it's not weighted one side or the other. It also doesn't go on forever.
Okay.
A normal round is about 15 to 20 minutes.
Great.
All games are different, and you never know who is going to win until the very last moment. So it has this delicious quality, which everybody knows from their childhood, that you're complacent at the end of the board, you toss the dice, you think, I've got this game in the bag, ha, ha, ha. And then your sister gets a couple of sixes, knocks you off, and wins under your nose. And this is intrinsic to this ancient game. Surely the structure of the board illustrates this point, that the whole process of playing controlled by dice, where luck is everything,
right,
there is a kind of strategy within the use of the throws, but there was always this thing that you never know who's going to win. And
so it's
I think that is something crucial. It's something crucial.
So you could probably easily say that it's a high luck, high strategy type of game, which are the best games, the ones where skill is always an element in the game, but then also luck is a part of the element of the game, so you're not ever relying on one thing too heavily.
This is a very serious point that you raise, because in this ancient game of Ur, in the terms of the balance, the luck is higher than the skill.
Okay.
It's something like, say, 60 to 40.
Okay.
And this game was played for 2,500 years, and when it disappeared, the reason was probably that backgammon came into the world.
Got it.
And backgammon has a 50-50 balance,
right,
or closer to 50-50 balance, luck and chance. So in a way, backgammon is a better version of the same sort of game. But when it arrived through the Roman game, people realized that you could have a race game with a higher intellectual component, and it supplanted the old game. But it lasted for nearly 3 millennia. It's pretty good.
That's a great shelf life for a board game.
Yeah,
I have to say.
Indeed.
So using backgammon as kind of, you're saying its spiritual successor in a way, is that kind of the closest modern comparison that we could have to what this is?
I think so.
Okay.
For example, the game of Parcheesi, which is played in America still, people have sets under their televisions in cupboards and things. You have a crossboard and you race around the edge. This is basically a race game where luck is everything.
Okay.
But this game has a very ancient history. And if it had always been that Parcheesi was a game of silly luck, it never would have lasted. But the original game, which was played in India, is a whole different kettle of fish, because when you play that game, there are 2 against 2, and when you throw the dice, you can have multiple throws until you have a really big number, like 73. If you're lucky, you keep throwing it, until it's cancelled. You have a big score, and then you have to take the total and divide it between the pieces like that. And no English player of Snakes and Ladders or Ludo could ever do that. I've seen Indians do it. They do it like razor blades. So you have this thing that where you have a game with that kind of component,
right,
it can last for thousands of years. And this is, I think, a very important matter, because in the history of the world, there have not been many games, and the ones which survive last forever. It's good. But the thing about the study of board games is that hardly anybody's undertaken it. And when you get a particular game and you pull like a piece of wool which is in a tangle, and you start to everyone's read it, the most astonishing thing comes out. I mean, you know, everybody knows that Monopoly, for example, was originally designed by a young Quaker lady in order to mitigate against major exploitative companies putting small people out of business. That was it. It was propaganda against it. And what did it become? It became the most powerful celebration of the lowest kind of human behavior. And perfectly normal children are converted into rapacious, savage, uncivilized persons within minutes of playing this game. And that is, of course, why it's so successful.
And they just dig into each other because everybody hates being bought out of a monopoly. But that was the whole point of the history of the game too, is that it got so voracious that even during the Berlin Wall, people were smuggling parts of the game across the wall so they could play it on the other side because they wanted the idea that they had control of capitalism. Like, they wanted to participate in that system, even though the original design of the game was to showcase how terrible it is to have a monopoly in the world. So the game was originally designed to make you angry, is what it was.
So. But you know something else about it, that nobody ever learnt Monopoly by reading the rules inside the lid. What actually happens is you watch your family or your brothers and sisters or whatever playing, and you pick it up and you learn it. So that means that all over the world, Monopoly players have never been officially instructed in what this game really involves. And a friend of mine was once employed in Italy in a company who made board games. And he thought he had to man this phone 24 hours a day when people rang up in an emergency. You know, we're playing this game. What happens if you move this? Are you allowed to do that? This kind of inquiry. So he was on top of that. But he told me that the bulk of the inquiries was nothing to do with the new productions. It was to do with Monopoly, because there were loads and loads of local family traditions and nobody knew what the rules were. So, for example, where do you discard the money? This way, this way, this way, this way. So he always had to answer the question. But the serious point is that he became an arbiter at the International Monopoly World Competition.
Oh my gosh.
And this competition was won more than once by the same person, thereby throwing into doubt the question of whether Monopoly is a game of luck. And secondly, he had to open the proceedings by firing a gun and saying, ladies and gentlemen, never mind what you do in your own houses, but as far as we are concerned, these are the rules of Monopoly. And all the competitors had to sign up that they would follow the same rules. So this tells you something about rules in the world, because we are living in an environment where everybody is given rules about everything all the time. But in fact, it's an artifice in the world. People really should operate by judgment. And before printed rules came into the world, and committees and competitions and all that, people played the way they learnt it from their neighbours. And sometimes they couldn't quite remember, so they made up something, or they thought this was a bit boring and they put something else. So you have this very organic, fertile history of how board games exist in the real world before commerce, before copyright, and before rules, which changed the whole face of everything.
So in ancient history, board game rules were dictated orally through their generations, people who learned it from their grandfathers or learned it from their grandmothers.
Exactly. Something like that. And if they couldn't quite remember, they made it up themselves. Right. And this tablet that we had, we found with the rules on, it wasn't a don't you do this, it wasn't a kind of instruction, it was a collection of all these traditions in one manual, which is incredibly interesting. I'll tell you something. You know King Tutankhamun, the well-known Egyptian pharaoh who decided to die young so he'd become famous. It's a well-known principle in show business. Well, in his tomb they found 3 or 4 boxes with board games on, with the same game of Or on one side and the game of Senate on the other. So he played this game and we know how he played it. That's cute, isn't it? And this replica, which I have, was made by the museum quite a long time ago, and it was rather costly. And after a while they stopped making it, so we don't have it in our shop. But do you think if we made something like this which was not so expensive, do you think that board game players who are obsessed with all these modern pieces of rubbish might once in a while think, how interesting to try this out and see whether it's as good as people say? Is it worth us doing that?
I think.
What do you think? Because you can't get them very easily. It seems such a shame to me that the kings of Mesopotamia, Tutankhamun, played this game, and we know how to play it.
I think if the king of Tutankhamun can enjoy it, I think if King Tutankhamun can enjoy it, I think the modern family of now would probably have a good time with it as well too. I have to tell you, I want to play this game. I want to sit with you and play this game. If I'm ever in the UK, I hope there's an opportunity that I could come and sit with you.
You come over here, you're on anytime you fancy.
That's wonderful. And to be fair, I think as a board game designer, I look at that and I see literally one of the most simple and basic and most beautiful board games of my life.
Isn't it cute? I mean, just take a look at it. It's sheer beauty, really.
Great.
Anyway,
looks like you can paddle somebody with it as well.
It's been a pleasure meeting you.
It was a pleasure, Dr. Finkel. I have so much information to absorb, but just the fact that you've been able to bring history back into the lives and back onto the tables of people is a wonderful gift that you've brought to the world. And even though board games are changing the lives of people everywhere, you're showing us that history doesn't just show us, the mirror of our past, but it also can show us the mirror of our culture and of our play by giving us the gift of these ancient games as well too. So thank you so much.
You put that very well. I entirely agree with you. Okay.
I just want to get a hold of this game at this point, and I'm so happy that we could share it with everybody on this International Tabletop Day to show just kind of where the roots of all this awesome family entertainment can be.
I think that's a really exciting thing for us. We're really, really happy about it. It's marvelous.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And go out and find more awesome stuff so you can tell me about it. I want to know everything.
You're on.